Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate what happens when students run into problems rolling out slabs of clay. They remember to wedge the clay, but then they forget step 2, which is to flatten it with CPR hands. And they remember to put their guide sticks on either side, but then they take their rolling pin and they try to roll a rock of clay. Well, this is all that's going to happen. Your rolling pin is just going to flip all around that clay because it's too thick. So that's why you have to flatten it like CPR hands. This is the stencil that you're going to be using. So before I roll the clay, I like to kind of flatten the clay to be closer to the shape of the stencil before I roll. Then I'm ready to roll that clay. So the other mistake that I see students do is I call it steamrolling, where they try to roll from the front of the clay all the way around across the top. And what's going to happen is your clay is going to wrap around that rolling pin like a taco. That's because you didn't roll from the middle of the clay. Another problem I see is students press as hard as they can till their rolling pin hits the guide stick. Then they try to roll that clay, and the same thing's going to happen. Your clay is going to get stuck, and it's just going to wrap around the rolling pin. So that's why you have to wedge and then flatten with CPR hands. So, anytime your clay is starting to stick to your rolling pin, you'll see that the clay starts to rip on the surface. So, once it's stuck to the rolling pin, you need to clean that off because clay stuck on the rolling pin acts like glue. Anytime your rolling pin is dirty, it's just going to continue to stick to the clay. When you see that the top of your clay is getting sticky, stop and turn the clay over so the sticky side's touching the table. Clean off the rolling pin and then check your stencil as you're rolling. So I know that my stencil is not wide enough, so I need to turn my clay a quarter turn, and now when I roll, it will be able to fit that stencil. So once I've got my clay completely rolled flat, it's uniform thickness, I want to check for air bubbles. If I see little bubbles under the surface of the clay, I'm going to pop them, which I don't see any on this one. But if I had them, I could just smear them with my finger, or I could pop them with a tool like a needle tool. So this needle tool is sharp on the end, but it's not so sharp that it's going to cut you. But we don't want to cut clay with a needle tool because it is fragile. So if I try to cut with it, I can bend that end and that can actually break off. So this tool is really just for carving or popping bubbles on the surface of the clay. A better tool to cut with is called a fettling knife. The fettling knife is not even as sharp as a butter knife. It's meant to cut clay, but it does look like a very sharp knife. So the fettling tool and the needle tool, I should never see you making a fist and stabbing these items into the surface of the table. I shouldn't see you pretending to poke or stab or cut another student or yourself, and these never ever leave my classroom. So when I'm ready to cut my stencil, I have to make sure it fits. If it doesn't fit, I need to get another piece of clay, re-wedge it, roll it out so it's a little bigger. When I cut, I'm going to stick that fettling knife straight up and down till I hit the tabletop. I'm going to hold the stencil still with my other hand, and I'm going to cut straight up and down all the way around. I want to be careful that I'm not cutting at an angle and that my knife isn't going under the paper, because then my bottom slab is not going to be a rectangle. So then I can set these off to the side, and now I have a nice slab of clay to work with. Today I want you to let me check your slab of clay to make sure it's uniform thickness before you cut your stencil. If you get your stencil cut out, you're going to save this piece of clay, and then if you still have class time, you're going to take your scrap of clay and you're going to wedge it with another piece of clay, and then you'll cut out your wall stencils, because you'll need 4 pieces to build up your walls. So the next video is going to explain how we wrap that up at the end of